My name is Jacqueline Brenner. I am a human services analyst focusing primarily on SNAP policy. I am joined today by Andrew Prehart, the Human Services Analyst Supervisor of the SNAP Employment and Training Policy Unit, and Ben Sentz, a Human Services Analyst who specializes on the Compass Community Partner Dashboard. My supervisor, Jessica Garvik, will also be monitoring the chat. So for those of you who may not know, if you could please mute yourselves, that would be great. Thank you. So for those of you who may not know, SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. Today, we will provide a brief overview of the general eligibility rules for SNAP that apply to everyone, the additional eligibility rules that pertain to students, and how your institution can become a community partner to assist your students in applying for SNAP. In the interest of time, we ask that you hold your questions until the end. You may put questions in the chat as we go if you would like. If you could please start your question with the word question in all caps so we can more easily locate it in the chat, that would be great. We will be providing resources to you, including this slide deck, after the presentation. I'm sure you're all familiar with the alarming statistics around college hunger and food insecurity. A 2018 Government Accountability Office study has shown that in recent years, anywhere from about 1 in 10 students to over half of college students are affected by food insecurity. So even in the best case scenario, any classroom you walk into probably has more than one hungry student trying to learn. Even worse, most students who are potentially eligible for SNAP don't receive that help. That number is likely even higher than 57% now due to the pandemic. The problem of college hunger is rightfully gaining a lot of attention, as both Pennsylvania's First Lady and the Biden-Harris administration have made the problem a priority and are seeking solutions. SNAP rules are complicated. So I want to start by saying that if you're ever unsure if a student may qualify, submit the application anyway. Our county assistance offices will make the determination. First, we'll go over some basic SNAP eligibility rules that apply to everybody. To apply for SNAP in Pennsylvania, the applicant must be a resident of Pennsylvania. The residence can be temporary, such as a student from out of state who is just living here for the school year. Proof of residency is required. Applicants must also be a U.S. citizen or a qualified non-citizen. Most qualified non-citizens are subject to what we refer to as the 5-year bar, meaning they have to live in the U.S. for 5 years before they can be eligible for SNAP. Refugees and asylees, including people who have recently fled the violence in Afghanistan and Ukraine, can receive SNAP without that wait. Proof of citizenship status is required when our sources are unable to verify citizenship. So who should be on the application? Anybody who lives together, who buys their food together, and shares most of their meals have to apply together as one household for SNAP, even if they're not related. A person who is under the age of 22 who lives with their parents does have to apply with their parents, even if they don't share food. Spouses must also apply together if living together. For most households in Pennsylvania, the gross income limit is now 200% of the federal poverty income guidelines, which is $2,266 per month for a one-person household for this fiscal year. There are additional deductions granted, and most households must also pass a net income test. An important thing to note is that student financial aid, including federal or state work-study programs, grants, and loans, are not considered income. Income would be considered income from a job, self-employment, or unearned income like Social Security or unemployment benefits. So when an application is submitted, a household must be interviewed and provide all necessary verification to have their eligibility determined. A caseworker should attempt to cold call each applicant the day the application is submitted or the following day. If the applicant misses that phone call, they will receive a notice in the mail explaining how to complete their interview and what proof is needed. The household will receive a notice after the application is processed telling them if they were eligible, their benefit amount if they were eligible, or a reason why they were not eligible. Okay, so SNAP student policy is notoriously confusing, as illustrated by this flowchart outlining our policies here in Pennsylvania. During this presentation, my colleagues and I will attempt to break it down into chunks that make sense. So first of all, meal plans. It is important to note that if a student has a meal plan through your institution that covers more than half of their meals, they are not eligible for SNAP. That is true even if the student meets one of the exemptions that we're going to discuss in a bit. Their meal plan can make them ineligible. If we consider that there are 3 meals in a day and 7 days in a week, that makes 21 meals per week. Exactly half is 10.5. So a meal plan that covers 10 meals per week or less is okay, and the student can still be eligible. However, if a meal plan covers 11 meals per week or more, that's over the 50%, and the student is no longer eligible for SNAP. This is a good question to ask students up front. So, for example, say Susie is a student at ABC University, where they purchase a partial meal plan entitling them to receive breakfast and lunch on weekdays only. Since Susie receives only 10 out of 21 meals from their meal plan, they can receive SNAP if they meet eligibility rules and are otherwise eligible for SNAP. So again, it is advisable to screen students to determine if they're receiving a meal plan that provides more than half of their meals first, because if they are ineligible for SNAP, no matter if they meet the other student rules or not. Thus, this is how we start off our flowchart. So, who is a student? The basic rule is that college students, even if they're not on a meal plan, aren't eligible for SNAP unless they meet an exemption. So first question to ask yourself is whether or not the person is actually considered a student at all. For SNAP purposes, a student is someone who is enrolled at least half-time in an institution of higher education, or IHE. An IHE usually requires a high school diploma or an equivalent degree before a student can enroll. An IHE also typically awards students some kind of degree or certification as a result of their studies. In short, the definition of an IHE includes most colleges, many technical or trade schools, but does not include high school students. In addition, for SNAP purposes, a student must be enrolled in the IHE at least half-time. Each IHE has their own definition of what half-time means, so you'll be the one to make that determination. You may need to verify this for your students. If an individual is enrolled at least half-time in an IHE, they are considered a student and they are subject to the SNAP student rules. If they are enrolled in a school that is not an IHE, or if they are enrolled in the IHE less than half-time, then they are not a student and they only need to follow normal SNAP eligibility rules. So returning to our flowchart, we are going to assume moving forward that the student is not receiving a meal plan providing 11 or more meals per week. The next thing that we look at is whether the student is enrolled or planning to enroll at least half-time in an IHE. If the school is not an IHE, or if they're enrolled less than half-time, they are eligible. So after we've clarified that a student is not receiving a meal plan providing more than half of their meals, and a student is enrolled more than half time in an IHE, we have to determine whether the student meets an exemption. If they do, they may receive SNAP if otherwise eligible. If they don't, they're ineligible for SNAP. Today, I'll be breaking down our exemptions into three categories, the first two of which will contain several examples each. It is only necessary for a student to meet one exemption in order to receive SNAP. So first, we're going to talk about the temporary expansion that is related to the public health emergency. These criteria are temporary and not the only criteria for SNAP. Second, there will be our permanent federal exemptions. These exemptions apply uniformly nationwide and will remain available after the public health emergency ends. And finally, Pennsylvania has adopted an expanded interpretation of federal regulations to allow certain community college students to be eligible for SNAP. My colleagues and I will discuss each of these categories in more depth over the next several slides. So Congress temporarily expanded eligibility to many more students as a result of the public health emergency. During the public health emergency, students who are enrolled at least half-time in an institution of higher education who are eligible for a work study or who have completed their free application for federal student aid and had an expected family contribution of 0 can be eligible. The student does not have to be actively working in a work-study job to meet this criteria. They only need to be eligible. These exemptions are tied to the federal public health emergency, not to any state or local emergency order. This expansion will be phased out when the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services takes action to end the federal public health emergency. We encourage you to assist these students because they can remain eligible for SNAP until their next renewal after the public health emergency ends. So returning to our flowchart, we're going to assume moving forward that the student did enroll at least half-time in an institution of higher education. So after establishing that the student is enrolled at least half-time in an institution of higher education, we begin screening for the exemptions, starting with that public health emergency exemption that we just went over. If the student meets one of the public health emergency exemptions, they can receive SNAP if otherwise eligible. Okay, so let's move on to the permanent federal exemptions to student policy. The first factor is age. Anybody who is under the age of 18 or age 50 and over can be considered an eligible student. The next factor is disability. If somebody has a physical or a mental impairment, they can be an eligible student. If the disability is not immediately obvious, it will need to be verified. Verification can include receipt of disability benefits or a note from a doctor or a psychologist. So many students with dependent children can be eligible for SNAP. Single parents, single parent students, there we go, can be considered eligible students if they are responsible for at least one child who is under the age of 12, or if they receive TANF, regardless of the age of their children. The students in two-parent households can be eligible if they have at least one child who is under the age of 6, or at least one child aged 6 to 11 if adequate childcare is not available to them. These parents can also be eligible students if they receive TANF, regardless of their children's ages. Employment is another federal exemption. If a student is employed at least 20 hours per week, or is self-employed with earnings of $145 per week, which would be minimum wage times 20, then they are eligible. They may also be in a paid on-the-job training program. Things like unpaid student teaching or unpaid internships do not count here. So please note that while it can help students to meet the student eligibility criteria, income from employment, like we mentioned earlier, also counts against the SNAP benefit calculation, which may lead to a lower benefit amount, or in some cases, if they're making more than 200% of the federal poverty income guidelines, then that can push them over the income limit. And finally, they may have a state or federal work study job. Unlike the public health emergency policy, students must actively be working in the work study job to be considered eligible for this exemption. This is part of the financial aid package, and there's no minimum number of hours per week that are required. In this specific instance, because it's considered financial aid, the income from their work study job does not count in the SNAP benefit calculation. And finally, a student can be considered eligible if they enrolled through school or if they enrolled in school through or because of one of the three listed workforce development programs on this slide. The WIOA program is administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry and local workforce development boards through the PA Career Link centers. Oftentimes, a student will be granted an individualized training account, or ITA, by the Career Link in order to pay for schooling. If a student is enrolled in school through a WIOA ITA, they are eligible for SNAP purposes. The Workforce Development System also administers programs under the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, or TAA. These programs are designed to help workers who are adversely affected by outsourcing and foreign trade. And finally, students who are already receiving SNAP when they enroll in an institute of higher education can potentially be eligible for SNAP through our SNAP Employment and Training Program. In a few slides, I'll hand things off to my colleague from the Bureau of Employment Programs to speak more on this eligibility exception. So returning to our flowchart, we're going to assume moving forward that the student did not meet one of the temporary public health emergency exceptions. So as we just discussed, the next thing to screen for would be whether the individual meets one of the permanent federal exemptions. If they meet just one of those exemptions, whether it's age, disability, being a parent, employment, or a work program, then they're eligible. And now I'm going to hand things over to Andrew to talk a bit more about our SNAP employment and training exemption and our PA expansion exemption.
All right. As Jackie mentioned earlier, participants who enroll in an IHE through or in compliance with certain job training programs are considered to meet the criteria for a permanent federal exemption. As the SNAP E&T policy supervisor here at DHS, I'm going to home in a bit more on how our exemption works. It can be a bit complicated to understand at first, but used properly, it's a really great way to help more students not only be eligible for SNAP itself, but also a whole host of associated supports. Our SNAP Keystone Education Yield Success, or KEYS, program is open to individuals who are eligible for SNAP under one of the criteria Jackie's already laid out, or who enroll in KEYS prior to enrolling in school. In addition, to participate in KEYS, the student must be enrolled at, registered for, or interested in enrolling at one of 14 participating community colleges. That's all of the community colleges in Pennsylvania except for Erie Community College, which is a more recently launched community college that we're still working to bring on board. Additionally, the student must meet our Perkins 5 or High Priority Occupation (HPO) test, meaning that their major or course of study must count as career and technical education under the Perkins Act, or it must align with a high priority occupation in a local workforce development area. Our State Department of Labor and Industry maintains an online list of HPOs that is updated each year. Finally, the student must not have all of their educational costs already met by other sources. Students enrolled in KEYS receive intensive case management, assistance with tutoring, and, depending on the school, may benefit from textbook and laptop loan programs. In addition, KEYS students are eligible to receive special allowances through the local CAO. These SPALs provide assistance paying for things like transportation, technology, textbooks, and the big one for so many of our students, childcare. Our KEYS expansion initiative replicates many of the great parts of the KEYS program for students at the PASHE state-owned colleges, as well as several dozen career and technical schools throughout the Commonwealth. DHS maintains a list of KEYS expansion schools on our website. The criteria to participate in KEYS expansion, as well as the benefits of participating, are similar to those to participate in KEYS. However, KEYS expansion is facilitated by a different contractor, known as our Employment Advancement and Retention Network, or EARN program. Unlike regular KEYS providers, who are community college employees providing students with services on campus, the EARN providers facilitating KEYS expansion are contracted through the local Workforce Development Board and are usually located inside a local PA CareerLink center. KEYS expansion participants receive case management and other supports and are also eligible to receive SPALs. PADHS developed the reverse referral form to allow ENT contractors, including both KEYS community colleges as well as EARN in their capacity administering the KEYS expansion program, to refer an individual for participation in the SNAP ENT program. The CAO reviews this form and decides whether to either refer or not refer the individual to the ENT program. We strongly recommend that KEYS and KEYS expansion schools work with students to complete this form prior to their formal enrollment date. Again, as Jackie mentioned, this is defined as the first day of classes of the first year the individual is attending the IHE. Student status does not typically reset over the summer, it is continuous. This will ensure that students remain eligible to receive ENT services through KEYS or KEYS expansion. In some cases, if the referral is not done prior to enrollment, the individual could be locked out of participating in ENT. This also helps ensure that our KEYS expansion students remain eligible for the SNAP benefit itself, even if they don't meet one of the other federal exemptions or one of the public health emergency exemptions that Jackie discussed. KEYS community colleges should assist the student in completing the form, and then the school should securely email the form to their local CAO contact. In the case of PASHE and other KEYS expansion schools, the school should work with the local EARN center as an intermediary to process the reverse referral. Returning to our flowchart, it's been a little while. Let's assume that a student doesn't meet any of the temporary public health emergency exemptions or any of the permanent federal exemptions other than the SNAP ENT exemption. The next thing we'll want to look at is whether the IHE that the student is planning to enroll in is a community college, specifically one of our 14 participating community colleges. Again, we're hoping to add Erie soon. If the student is planning to enroll in community college and meets the criteria to participate in KEYS, we'll next want to ascertain whether they meet the Perkins 5 or HPO criteria. If they do, they meet a federal exemption because they are enrolling in college through the SNAP ENT program. If they're one of the few community college students who do not meet the Perkins or HPO criteria, then they are not eligible for SNAP. Now, this raises the question of what to do if a student is um, planning to enroll in an IHE that's not a community college. Here again, the ENT exemption gives us a bit of flexibility. First, we'll need to verify if the IHE the student is planning to enroll in is a PASHE state-owned university or a participating KEYS expansion school. Again, the student will need to demonstrate they meet the Perkins 5 or HPO criteria. This is also when they should ask the CAO to refer them to KEYS expansion through EARN. If they meet the criteria and are enrolled in EARN, they'll also be eligible for SNAP because they'll have enrolled in the institution of higher education through the SNAP ENT program. As noted on the prior slides, attending school through SNAP ENT is, in and of itself, a student exemption if the student starts receiving SNAP and is enrolled in ENT prior to enrolling in school. In the late 2010s, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services observed that this still failed to cover a great deal of Pennsylvania's community college students, many of whom hail from food insecure, low-income households of color. If these students weren't otherwise exempt and didn't know about SNAP ENT prior to enrolling in school, they'd effectively be locked out of receiving food assistance for 2 years or more while in school. To address this, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services took action in 2018 to designate a community college education itself pursued outside of the KEYS program as comparable to employment and training. This unlocked a flexibility in federal rules, allowing Pennsylvania DHS to extend eligibility to students who enroll in community college prior to receiving SNAP or without participating in KEYS. This exemption was announced in Ops Memo 180304, and so we sometimes call the exemption the Ops 180304 exemption. These students need to meet the same Perkins or HPO criteria explained previously with respect to KEYS. In our experience, a great deal of community college students do meet these criteria. Those few who do not are not eligible for the exemption, and thus cannot receive SNAP unless they meet a different exemption. Currently, students who are eligible under this specific exemption may not participate in the KEYS program. They are only able to receive the actual SNAP food assistance benefit itself, but not the case management or SPALs discussed earlier. We're currently operating a pilot at one community college, Harrisburg Area Community College, or HAC, that allows these students to enroll in KEYS and will consider expanding KEYS enrollment to OPS 180304 students at additional community colleges in the future. Again, to clarify, the policy allows students who meet this specific exemption to receive SNAP benefits at 14 community colleges, but not participate in KEYS or receive SPALs. And this particular exemption does not extend to students who are already enrolled at a PASHE or KEYS expansion school. The Department of Human Services has developed the Community College Verification Form to verify the OPS 180304 exemption. A student must request that a community college school official answer the 4 questions, then sign the form. By signing the form, the college official is attesting that they understand that the student's course of study or major meets the Perkins Act definition of CTE, or that the college official understands it to be associated with a high priority occupation. Please note, if the community college official is struggling to determine whether a given occupation is a high priority occupation, or whether a given curriculum aligns with a particular occupation that is listed on the high priority occupation list, the community college official should consult the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industries HPO lists and Pennsylvania's Classification of Instructional Program / Standard Occupational Classification, or SIP SOC crosswalk. We've included a link to the website containing these resources at the end of this presentation. Returning to our flowchart, once we've clarified that a student isn't planning to enroll in an IHE, but rather that they're already enrolled, we should determine whether the type of IHE they're enrolled in is a community college. If they are enrolled in community college and they meet the same Perkins 5 or high priority occupation criteria we discussed earlier, they can provide their completed community college verification form to the CAO in order to establish SNAP eligibility under our OPS 180304 exemption. Since this is the end of the flowchart, students would be ineligible if they fail to meet either of these criteria, being enrolled in community college and meeting Perkins 5 or HPO, and they didn't meet any of the aforementioned public health emergency or federal exemptions, including enrollment in an IHE through SNAP ENT. As you can see, the OPS 180304 eligibility expansion and the option to enroll in an IHE through ENT, specifically through KEYS, are quite similar, but there's an important nuance. The ENT exception is available to students at community colleges as well as some four-year institutions and technical schools. However, it has to be established proactively before the date of enrollment in the IHE. On the other hand, the OPS 180304 exception is limited to only community college students. However, it can be established at any time after the student enrolls in an IHE. And then to recap, here's our full flowchart detailing all of the exemptions that Jackie and I discussed. Now, I'll hand things off to Ben, who's going to share some information with you about Compass Community Partnerships.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ben Sens, and I work for Department of Human Services with the Bureau of Policy, and I assist community partners with their accounts and with using our Compass website to submit applications on behalf of individuals. So Compass is useful for submitting applications, and it's used by individuals to submit applications for themselves. But organizations can also submit applications on behalf of individuals using our Compass Community Partner Dashboard. And the dashboard can also help you save and track applications, and there's other benefits as well. So you will be notified by headquarters of any issues with Compass may be experiencing, or if there's system outages. You'll also be able to scan or attach documents and images related to the application or individuals' cases. And you'll be able to look up renewal dates and submit renewals on behalf of individuals as well. There's also many more features to Compass, and in order to register, you can visit the Compass website and click on the account in the upper right corner, and Compass Community Partners is part of the drop down under there, which separates the login area from the individuals and families that submit for themselves. And I've also included a link here directly to that for organizations to use. Now, in order to register as a Compass Community Partner, that's done in a two-step process, which involves registering the organization and then also registering users underneath that organization. So from that Compass landing page, you would click start online self-registration link. It's outlined there right in the bottom right. And that'll take you through the registration process. And there's also a link underneath that to the guide to the online self-registration that can pretty much answer any questions you have about the registration process and walk you through different flows to register different types of users. When you go to the next slide. So in order to register your organization and yourself and any other users, so we require an email address and the organization's FEIN number. And so it's possible, a common issue that people run into here is that if sometimes the organization's already registered. So some of you may already be familiar with Compass, or you may have usernames, business partner IDs registered with other Commonwealth systems that maybe you've already used. And we'll find that out, when you enter your email address and the FEIN in the system. So it's possible you could receive an error message when you enter those saying that you're already registered, but that's okay, and we can still add Compass access to your existing account if that is the case. The first step is always to refer back to that online self-registration guide that I mentioned earlier, but you can also reach out to us using this this email address here with any Compass related questions or any issues during registration. Once registered, this is an example of what you will see as your Compass Community Partner dashboard. So they'll say welcome, your name, and then your organization there. Some organizations also find it beneficial to register multiple locations and to be able to distinguish applications submitted from different areas, and you can select those from the drop down in the upper right there. You'll see new application and renew your benefits there in the middle, and that will probably be what you're using most often, assuming that you're submitting applications for SNAP or other DHS benefits on behalf of students or their families. You're also able to view any applications that you've submitted in the past along with their e-form number, and you can also view them by organization. So any applications that anyone else in your organization has submitted as well will also appear on that list. Some other useful features are attaching documents. You'll see that in the left-hand navigation over there, and you can use the e-form number to submit things like income verification, other necessary verifications for the applications there. And if there are any Compass related questions, I can also help answer some of those. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Ben, and thank you, Andrew. So we have gathered the links that were discussed throughout this PowerPoint in one place so that you can easily refer to them again later. And again, we will make sure that you receive all of the materials that we have presented here today. Okay. I know that was a lot of material covered in a very short time. If you come up with questions after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to any of these email addresses listed on this slide. And we'll now open up the floor for questions. You can either unmute yourselves or place your questions in the chat, and we'll answer as many questions as we can in the remaining time allotted. I saw a lot of questions popping up in the chat. So Jessica, I'm not sure if you're able to read off some of those questions, or again, if folks want to unmute themselves, we can do that too.
One of the questions that wasn't answered was, does the Perkins V or HPO IHE have to work with the EARN program?
Hi, that's a good question. So the EARN program is only going to be utilized by institutions that are KEYS expansion institutions, which would be our PASHE colleges and a few other career and technical schools that are on the KEYS expansion list. So if a school is a community college, they would have their own KEYS program, and they would work through that instead of working through the EARN Center.
Hi, my name's Mary Ann Heitmanick. I'm from Northampton Community College, and I did put the question in the chat, but I figured I'd just ask it. This actually happened yesterday. I have a student who's 18. He lives on his own. He does work. I'm not sure how many hours. He's a new student, and his parents just want nothing to do with him. He sees them. They even refused to sign off on the FAFSA application, so he couldn't get FAFSA until they worked all that out. But I'm not clear with the age issues if he can apply, or is he eligible at 18? Because he's going to be 22 for 4 years.
Right. He can apply at the age of 18.
Okay.
The only thing, yeah, because he meets some of the other eligibility criteria. The age under 18 or over 50, that's like one of the many eligibility criteria that he would have to meet.
Okay.
And since the age 22 part, since you said he's not living with his parents,
Right.
then he can apply on his own without his parents. The only time that his parents would have to be included is if they all lived at the same address.
Okay. He wasn't sure. I did ask him this, if his parents claim him on their income tax. Would that make a difference?
Not for SNAP.
Okay.
It would for medical assistance. So if you're helping him apply for multiple benefits, that could be something that comes into play. But for SNAP, that's not the case.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Jessica, was there anything in the chat that we haven't addressed yet?
Yes, there was. So, and I think I know the answer to the first one, but I'm hoping Andrew may jump in on this one. And it's related to the meal plan. If a student has meals and food, like they get like they have extra bucks on their card that they can use for food. That doesn't count towards their meals, correct?
Right. I'm pretty sure that's what we had decided because we can't really put a value on that.
Right.
So we're looking specifically at the number of meals.
Okay. And then one of the other questions were, what can be considered proof of residency? Can it be a bill from the university? And I answered that one with yes, any piece of mail, basically that shows the address of the student can be used to verify their proof of residency. Let's see what else they asked. So there were two Compass ones, hopefully that Ben can answer. The one was, is it possible to change the email address after the fact of registration? They said they were only a temporary employee at the office of the university. And I assume they would just email the account administration mailbox if they need to change their email address. Is that correct, Ben?
Hi, yeah, so you can change the email address, but so I'm assuming that you're asking that because you're saying once we set up an account and then the person using that account is going to leave and someone else will come in and use that account. So we try to avoid that with registrations, and we just have you register a new individual. So, so you can register and use your email address with that organization, and when you leave, we can deactivate that account, and we'll have the new person just re-register as a new user with their own information, and that way, there's no issues with if they get locked out and then they can't answer the security questions because someone else made them. So we just encourage each user who's going to be using Compass to register their own individual account when they start using that. So we can change the email address, but shouldn't be necessary. We just register a new person and deactivate yours once you leave.
Perfect. And there was one more. It said, after becoming a community Compass partner, is there a Compass user manual for new users?
Yes, there is, and I think we can include that with follow-up information to the group. We do have that.
Perfect.
I
And
think
the
I
only,
saw,
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I think I saw another Compass question too.
Yeah, there was one, if you could submit grants via Compass, or if you just have to use eGrants. But I was able to answer that one, and you can't
Okay.
submit grants via
All
Compass.
right. I'm also seeing one that says as part of a campus, what information will we need to provide to enroll as a community partner? So the only information we'll need is just the name of your organization, address, and a phone number, and then the FEIN number and an email address of the individual registering. And that's all provided during registration.
Perfect. And that was all the questions that were in the chat. So if anyone else has any others that we didn't answer, just let us know.
In the meantime, this is Lynette from PDE. I just wanted to make note that one, if you did not register via the registration form from the announcement, please send your email address to the RA account for the Hunger Free Campus program, and I have placed that in the chat so that we can get you the appropriate materials. And also just a reminder to all of our participants today that the PA Hunger Free Campus designation application will close on October 30th. And in order to apply for the grant that will open October 31st, you must be a designated hunger-free campus institution. So all of that is at our website. I will place the website in the chat for easy reference, but please keep note of those two dates.
You've all asked a lot of great questions. Did anybody else have anything else they wanted to ask? See a hand raised?
If we did apply for the Hunger Free Campus designation, when should we hear something back?
Sure. So if it was anywhere from after September 29th, you will be receiving notices this week.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you all for attending today's webinar about SNAP eligibility and becoming a Compass community partner. We look forward to developing partnerships with your organizations to assist students in need, and have a great rest of your day.
Truly appreciate this. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
all. Nice work. Thank you.
Thank you.